Welcome to the Dr. DC podcast for the first time today. My name is Dr. DC. Producer Richard isn't with us today. He's just sick. He's not dead. But joining us from across the airwaves, a good friend of ours, a stand-up comedian, tons of nerd cred in his own right, Gavin Clarkson.
Hello, lovely to be here.
Thank you for joining us.
No problem at all.
I don't know why I'm trying to play coy. Like, this is the second time I've done this. So if any regular listeners of the show know that this happens, then it should.
Look, I was willing to play along if you were, but you just showed your hand within like 30 seconds.
I don't have the cojones to keep the bit going. I can't. It's funny. I'd say it's kind of funny how we met because you're from the Yukon. You're from Whitehorse.
Yeah.
You no longer live here. I moved here later, and then you came up as a comedian for the comedy festival.
Yeah. We took completely missed paths.
Yeah, completely. But I saw you on stage. We talked about this in take number one, but you had a bit where you would do alphabet aerobics and replace everything with comic book superheroes. And both me and my wife kind of like eyes lit up. I was like, oh my God, this guy's so cool. And then I'd look around and be like, hey, and everybody?
Coolest guy in the room? Anyone? How is no one else on board? He's naming all the comic books characters.
It's a bit like only for me. I was like, how did you know I would be here?
Yeah. It was my version of Happy Birthday, Mr. President, but just for you.
Oh man, that would work. That would work on me.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked beforehand. I know you're a big fan of Batman, but in general, what are some of like the nerdy things you take in? Obviously Batman, but are you like a Trek guy? Are you into Star Wars? Like, what's your?
Yeah, so a big Batman fan. Also a big fan of the Marvel movies. Have hardly done any Marvel reading, but big fan of the movies. Got captivated by those. Other nerd stuff. I'm a big fan of space stuff. Like the space station shuttles, the Apollo rocket. Nice. Anytime Lego releases anything on space, I have to have it, which has become a costly addiction. Lego prices by the piece now, which is unfortunate.
Is that actually like their model? Is that actually how they do it?
No, not at all. It seems like it's definitely if it is a franchise that they had to pay licensing for, it like doubles the cost.
I know. So there's that new Rivendell set that's like 2,200 pieces, but it's also like $690.
Yeah. And 300 of that goes to like the movie daddy that owns the rights to it.
Yeah, totally.
Which is the nice thing about buying the space Lego, because that's kind of free domain. Nobody's making money off that. So it's really the discount Lego set, because it doesn't have named characters.
Yeah, we haven't fully carved up space yet for licensing.
No, exactly. I'm sure we're working on
it. So what's the thing about Batman that got you into it? Because like you said, you're not necessarily reading a ton of Marvel stuff. What is it about Batman that actually got you like picking up comics or collecting or reading?
Yeah, so I guess that's kind of the crux of why I contacted you guys too. Because my favorite thing about Batman was he was grounded. Like I love myself a good flights and tights adventure. I can handle like a little bit of it getting colorful. But Batman was always the guy just solving a murder, which I thought was very cool. And some of the other storylines with his more colorful characters, and even like when he's involved in Justice League cases, it gets pretty loopy pretty fast. Sure. Whereas like Batman, at least in the modern-ish era, post like the Dark Knight Returns, it's usually pretty chill until one of his friends gets involved. If it's just Batman on his own, he's like, I'm solving a crime. And then someone shows up in colors and he's like, what about the infinite time travel multiverse? He's like, all right, I'll play along. But otherwise, like he's like, fine, I guess we have to do this. Crossovers make money. Show me the way, Green Lantern. But like,
right, yeah.
But left to his own devices, it was usually pretty grounded, which is what I think captivated me about it, and was also probably why I was so dedicated to Batman.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, is there? I don't know kind of what the era was when you were reading, but is there like a story or like an arc or anything like that that really like stands out as like, man, that's like such a good Batman story. That's the one I go back to.
I was probably circa Hush. The Hush was
Oh,
my
okay.
favorite. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that one I went
Nice.
back to a lot. It's short, it's concise, the art is beautiful, the story is pretty neat with a cool twist in it. So Hush was my big go-to. I loved The Dark Knight Returns, but that one was tricky for me because when I I got into comic books later when I was a teenager, and it was the I went to a comic store and it's like, hey, I want to get into Batman. What's a good place to start? And he's
Oh
like, this
no.
is yeah. And he's like, Dark Knight Returns, best Batman ever, which it is. But if you've never read comic books before, it makes zero sense to you.
Yeah.
You're like,
It
why is
kind of
Batman
it.
kissing?
Yeah. It
Like, why
benefits
is.
from context. Yeah.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
really does. And that's what makes it so special. Like, I was reading as a kid, I'm like, why is Batman kissing that retired prostitute for no reason? Who is this? And it didn't make any sense. All the names that make sense, like they're mentioning Jason and stuff. I'm like, Jason's probably fun. I wonder what that's about. Like,
Yeah. Are we going to follow up on that? Nope.
yeah, no, we're not at all. It's something you're just supposed to know why that was a salient thing.
That's that's really funny. Okay,
Yeah.
so then we should come to what we're talking about today. Anyone that's listening to this episode has seen the title. You know that we're
Hmm.
talking about Final Crisis. So as someone
Yes.
who A doesn't necessarily read a ton of the wider universe
Yeah.
of things, and B is mostly a Batman person,
Yeah.
how did someone get you to read Final Crisis like independent of anything else?
Well, because Final Crisis was probably the last comic book I actually bought, and I never read it. I got it just when I
Oh,
was
okay.
moving away to university and moved away from my comic collection. And I cracked it open briefly, and it had this. The opening is like a blue god on a floating chair doing this 2001 Space Odyssey sort of thing. And I
Yeah,
was like,
yeah,
this isn't what I'm used to at all. And then just didn't and put it down and had to go to school. So it ended up being the last comic book I bought, and I bought it because of Batman. DC,
sure.
it was this huge crossover event, and DC kept touting it seriously as the end of Batman. Like
Right.
spoiler alert, this came out like 2009 or whatever, but spoiler alert, Batman dies. And
Yes,
they
yeah.
were treating it like it was a serious thing they were going to do. There was a lot of buzz. They were like, "We're done. This is it for Batman forever. Like
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
DC. We're just gonna take our second most powerful cash cow out back of the pasture and shoot in its little bat face. We're just gonna be done with Batman forever." And never mind the fact that The Dark Knight is coming out in a couple of months. We swear this is the end of Batman. Like
Right. Yes, yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah.
they were super. Nobody took them seriously because it's comic books. People never die. But DC was like, oh, it's super for real this time.
But that was the reason that you picked it up then, was
Yeah,
because it was going to be part of the Batman sort of
yeah. It
story.
was it was it was Death of Batman, and I had to be part of that. But
Right.
having no involvement with any of the other characters. So I read it very recently because I've had it in print. I have it where I live now, and it just sat on the shelf.
Right.
And with the new slate of DC movies introduced, I got all excited and picked up a DC Infinite subscription
Oh,
to
cool.
like,
Yeah.
which has been great because they even have a recommended reading part. They're like, hey, are you stoked about the movies? Here's the series they're based on,
That's cool.
and that
Nice. Yeah.
and that includes Morrison's Batman and Son storyline,
Right.
and he also did Final Crisis. So I was like, sweet, I'll learn about Damian Wayne, and then I'll read this fun How Batman Dies book, and that's not what it is at all. I wasn't ready for it at all.
I mean,
It is insane.
Final Crisis has such like a, I mean, in some ways, almost overinflated kind of cachet as like this impenetrable, wild, insane story.
Hmm.
And I don't think it's untrue, but I do think it can get like over exaggerated.
Yeah,
But then I just listening to like how you got to it, and I think
I wasn't ready.
it's not even about like how smart you are as a reader. It's just that like if you go and you're like, I've been reading comic books where Batman stops mobsters, and then you pick up
Yeah,
Final Crisis, it's like it's a complete like there's nothing recognizable, like even in
No.
the structure of the narrative. Like,
And he's barely in it. Like I bought it
yeah,
for the death of Batman, and he spends the entire saga off screen, like while they're trying to make a clone army of him or something, and
yes,
he's
yeah,
just gone. And then he appears, and then he dies, and he's in it for like 3 goddamn pages, and
yeah,
the
it's
rest of
true.
it is just like multiple versions of the Flash. One of them is Tin Hat Flash, which I assume is the Silver Arrow one, and they're outrunning Death on skis, and I have no idea what the hell is happening. And I'm trying to like follow along with these. I keep on Googling things like, what are they doing? Who are these people?
I mean, I I kind of love that. I mean, I've joked on the show before that a thing I'd like to do is to tell people to read events if they don't know what character they're in. I
Yeah.
don't know that I'd ever pick Final Crisis as the one to like make someone jump into, but I tell people to read events because you see a bunch of different characters. You might see a costume you're into or whatever, and
Totally.
then you can look them up from there.
A good
But
intro.
yeah, I mean, if so, did you have any context at all, even for like the Kirby stuff, like the New Gods, or for like
No.
any of that? Oh my god!
No, I didn't know anything about the gods. I didn't know any of that stuff. And that was apparently pretty crucial. I just knew Darkseid was the big bad.
Sure.
And even that, he's not really the big bad. The big bad, it turns out, are DC executives or something. Like,
I mean, more or less, yeah, yeah, yeah,
like I
yeah.
finished it and had to go on Wikipedia and be like, what did I just read? Someone explain it to me. And as I continue on, I'm just like, oh, okay, it's like it starts off as a flights and tights adventure, and then it's just slowly Grant Morrison disappearing up his own anus. That's pretty much
That's
it's
oh my god, that's so amazing. Okay, so
and again, I'm a casual comic fan, so I'm sure I'm gonna be eviscerated by real ones for misunderstanding the art.
I mean,
But it
here's the thing, though. I mean, I do think again, Final Crisis has a reputation that, like, even for comic fans, even for like the lifelong DC readers, it's kind of like,
yeah,
is
this
this
is a
the
lot.
event we signed up for? Like, this is, you know, because the other Crisis events are pretty linear, even if we're
Mhm.
talking about like the multiverse and like kind of like what slightly bigger concepts. It's basically like the first crisis is there's this being who's going to destroy everything. We got to
Yeah,
stop, team up. That's more or
yeah.
less Crisis
Natural
on
flights
Infinite
and tights.
Earths. Infinite Crisis, more or less, is we need to bring the multiverse back because the world's gotten too dark. We made the wrong world survive. And that's
Mhm.
it. Basic, more or less, you know,
Yeah,
very vague terms. And then Final Crisis, to your point, kind of has like parallel narratives that barely cross over. And
yeah,
one of them is about the Kirby characters, a dark side, and them dying and reincarnating, and the anti-life equation, and
yeah,
all of this sort of thing. And then there's also the story about the monitors and
yeah,
reality and creation and how they're infected by stories and they're also vampirically feeding
yep.
on stories. And yeah, it's like about writing and about like serialized
Yeah,
comics and stuff like
it's
that.
apparently super meta, but for
Yeah,
someone who doesn't appreciate that, it is insane pompous garbage. Like I understand Darkseid being revived in a detective's body in the anti-life, that's within my flights and tights tolerance. I can get behind that and be like, yeah, like this is comic book stuff. I can get this. But when it's like you have to go up a few universes and it's like monitors who are vampires and also the drinking the blood of things and Superman has to fight a vampire that's their biggest vampire. He has to fight the king of all the vampires.
yes,
And to
yeah,
get there, I had to take notes. To get there, he is at the edge, as far as I could tell, at the edge of creation or the universe or something. And
yes,
then Captain Atom, which is notably not Captain Atom and also not Dr. Manhattan, even though he looks exactly like him, has to combine Superman and Ultraman for some reason so that Superman can then embody in a higher realm. Checking my notes here, the cosmic armor Superman thought robot, which is a thing he needs to inherit in order to fight Mandrak the vampire. What is happening?
I'm
Somebody
picturing
throw a pie.
I'm picturing me trying to like explain this to my dad. Like, yeah,
It's
I mean,
like I,
it's true. There's a lot of there's a lot of pieces to it. I mean, just for context sake, and just because I find it interesting, that Captain Atom you're talking about
mhm.
is meant to be kind of like the original Charlton Comics Captain Atom before DC bought those characters. And that's the character
Okay.
that Dr. Manhattan is based on.
Oh,
Because
interesting.
Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons were initially going to use the Charlton action heroes as their Watchmen characters. And then they were
Oh,
told
that
they
makes so
couldn't,
much
so they
sense.
made analogs. So the
Right.
comedian is Peacemaker, Rorschach is the Question, Night Owl is Blue
Cool.
Beetle, Dr. Manhattan is Captain Atom. And that's kind of
Wow, I never
where
got
he
those
comes from.
parallels and they all make perfect sense. That's super cool.
Just I find that stuff fun. But yeah, I mean, there's nothing in that book that would tell you that. But
No, nothing. And also, like, I did Googling after. I'm just like I didn't get Mandrake, the big demon that he had to fight in the Thought Robot. And I was like, this must have been a big reveal. This must have been like, oh, they brought back Mandrake. And then I Googled it. It's like, no, he solely exists so that Superman can fight him in his Thought Robot in a higher dimension.
he's only in Final Crisis.
He's only,
That's it.
yeah, it's no other big bad. It's like we invented a vampire because we were in another dimension because we were out of ideas.
The monitors as a race are relatively new when you get to the to Final Crisis. But there was a monitor back in the first Crisis on Infinite Earths in the 80s.
Oh,
There's just
okay.
a single monitor, though. And then his counterpart was the bad guy of that event, the anti monitor, who was
Mhm.
destroying everything. And so then these monitors are meant to kind of be like subsequent sort of like thought forms of the original one.
Yeah.
But but again, like I think even readers are relatively would be relatively new to them when this thing came out because they only introduced them in Countdown, which was literally counting
Oh,
down to
wow.
Final Crisis.
Yeah,
So it was
yeah.
only in like the months preceding that people were like, oh, monitors, and kind of figuring out what they did or who they were or anything like that.
Yeah. So there's zero precedence, and they just kind of rush a story to mash a bunch of characters together. That sounds very DC.
I mean, oh god, yeah. I mean, I want to say it's not.
Don't we all?
I think just because there's a lot in this book, I think maybe a fun way to get at different parts of it is we got some questions from listeners about Final
Oh, perfect.
Crisis. Uh, I just want to say up top, it's way less about an actual answer than a way in to talk about a thing. So
Okay.
no,
I can
no
flip through it. I have
expectations
my
that way.
print copy.
I'm on my like 14th read of
Yeah.
Final Crisis now, and even I'm mostly
Just
sure.
going through the weeds. Yeah, that was something on like the Reddit thread I found that explained the meaning of like the subtext and stuff. Even though they're just like, with Grant Morrison, like it's pretty well known. You got to read his stuff multiple times. I'm like, then maybe he's not telling the story very well. If that's
They do have a tendency to write that way. And I think I know the thing that you're talking about. There's definitely at least one big Reddit
Mhm.
thing that tries to explain the story as like a metaphor for depression and things like that,
And
which I think
corporate
is
influence and yeah.
relatively insightful. Pretty good reading of it. But all right, I'm gonna go. We got questions here. So first question comes from Facebook. Braden Ketty asks, how did Batman end up back in time instead of vaporized by Darkseid's Omega beams?
Because money is the answer to that question.
I mean, the Omega beams, for those unaware, are very much like a heat vision, except that they move in cool zigzags.
Yeah,
They
and they
can
have to
move
connect or something,
independently of
right?
each other. They can't, yeah, they'll like, but they can move around objects. They're very frightening things. We see them vaporize people. We see them
Mhm.
do that all the time. Or sometimes they don't vaporize them. They just like, it's like getting shocked with a lot of electricity or something. If you watch like
Yeah,
the old, Superman animated series or things like that, that's the effect of the Omega beams in that show.
yeah. Before they get because he can't kill people in a kids show.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Interestingly, I've been reading some older New Gods stories lately, and I came across one where Darkseid sent his Omega beams out to transport Superman to him.
Oh, okay.
So the beams can do more things
Nice.
already.
Yeah.
But they grab Clark Kent and transport him. He's dressed as Clark Kent, and he ends up in front of Darkseid, and Darkseid goes, "How did my Omega beams get this wrong? I wanted Superman. Who's this guy?" Like the glasses fooled Darkseid.
That really reduces that it like it reduces his threat factor, doesn't it? Like he's like DC's biggest bad and he can't see past a pair of goddamn glasses.
It couldn't be this guy. There's no
Yeah,
way.
I'll put him back.
Yeah, I'll
Even
put him.
though my Omega beams were sent for this exact purpose and cannot be wrong, I'd rather accept that they're wrong than this nerd could be Superman.
Yeah, exactly. But all of this to say, in the vaguest of terms, the Omega beams canonically can do more
Hmm,
than vaporize. Now, the
fair,
question,
cool.
why would Darkseid do that? Great question. No idea. Um, and I'm not sure if they ever really revisit the why of that so much as it just happens, you
Right,
know?
yeah. Well, it's kind of like, and on the note of things getting two flights in tights, Red Hood is another favorite story of my line of mine.
Sure.
Except when they made the animated movie, they changed the salient detail of how Jason Todd came back to life. That is like we just put a silicon body in a casket. Shut up. Because in the comic
Yeah.
book, it cuts away to be like Superman punched time in the face, and that's how he came back alive.
It's Superboy Prime does
Superboy Prime.
the retcon punch. He punches reality so hard that things change.
The plot fix punch. Have they used him in that like plot fixing chamber several times, or is that the only one?
Well, that's the only time they did specifically the retcon punch. But in a tie-in series, Superboy Prime is part of Final Crisis. There's a story called Legion of Three Worlds, which is features the Legion of superheroes in the 30th century, and
Mhm.
Superboy Prime is there. And it's also a bit meta because Superboy Prime is sort of meant to. He's kind of like a angry fanboy, more or
Mhm.
less. Grew up in a world reading comics, gets the powers of Superman, and then decides that like they're doing the story wrong and kind of goes
Oh, I see.
crazy and becomes a villain. And in the future, he sees this like museum full of Superman stuff, and he realizes he's like not a notable villain, and he gets super pissed about it and goes on a tear against the Legion of Superheroes. He's like, "Oh,
Mhm.
I'll be a villain."
Make that mark.
Yeah, yeah. So he is technically part of this story. Superman briefly fights him in one of these like narrow windows of time that we keep checking in with Superman. Superman does, I'd say 80% of what he does in Final Crisis happens in the span of like 1.5 seconds.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because it's slow. One of the monitors comes in and slows down time, and it's like you want to save your wife, and then like they cuts him off to the edge of whatever
Yeah.
creation.
But then, probably in the version that you were reading, you check
Mhm.
in with him later and he's with Brainiac 5, and Brainiac shows
Yes.
him the Miracle Machine. That's Superman in the 31st century. So
Mhm.
that's after Legion of Three Worlds. You check in there and he's there. And that's why there's no real setup for him being there when you're just reading the Final Crisis
I
collection.
figured there was a tie-in to that. Yeah.
So that's what was happening in that time.
Okay, that works.
All right, let's go over to Twitter. We got a question here from Office Fun who asks, as I keep procrastinating reading the story, can you explain how they brought back Barry Allen? Also, do you agree with this, or do you think they should have just kept Wally as the main Flash and used Bart as Kid Flash? So Barry had been dead since Crisis on Infinite Earth. He
Mhm.
died in that event, and Wally had been a whole generation's Flash for a number of years. I'm sure he brought the Batman stuff for you.
Mhm.
And then they brought Barry back. Do you have any opinions on which Flash is the Flash?
I I know it as Barry Allen, but that's because I'm
Sure.
a very surface and it was Barry in the cartoons that I watched as a kid as well. I did notice that because there were three Flashes in Final, right? There's three of them sprinting through time, outrunning the Ski Man.
Yeah, so you have Wally, who's the current Flash, former Kid Flash. You have
Gotcha. Right.
Barry, who is the Silver Age Flash, the one from the 50s, the original Justice League Flash. And you have
Yeah.
Jay with the silver hat, who's the Golden Age Flash from the 40s, from the old Justice Society,
Right. Yeah.
the first generation.
Yeah. Yeah. Which made his silver hat made them much more easier to distinguish in Final
Yes,
Crisis.
I love that outfit. I think he's got such a good look. I kind of love the old like World
It's
War
so
One helmet.
distinctly 30s 40s. Like
Yeah,
there's very few super outfits you can like exactly point out the decade that
yeah,
clearly, except for
yes,
that hat combo.
it's true. I mean, I'll say I'm also. I mean, I'm a Barry guy because I grew up on my dad's comics, and Barry was the Flash in those ones.
Mhm.
Wally was still his sidekick. So I always kind of, I've never had a problem with Barry coming back.
Yeah.
He kind of displaced Wally for a bit in comics because of that, and I think people are a bit sore about that. But I think if you imagine that Morrison is writing this and he actually believes that this will be the final crisis, there's something kind of nice about bringing back the Flash that died in the first. I think
Right.
that's narratively interesting.
It bookends it a little bit.
I think that's kind of nice. I mean, I don't know how anyone working in corporate comics could ever believe that the event they were writing would be the final event, but
They always try to sell it that way. This is the for realsies one. We're closing up shop after this storyline. You better go get it.
it's been a good run. Yeah.
Yeah, it's about what we're done. We've written a story so good that we are just closing our industry.
I mean, that's kind of the last barrier left is we just need Marvel to be like, that's it. um, yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with Barry coming back, but I know
Right.
why people didn't like it. This question comes from Truth, Justice, and Hope, who asks, "What is the best part of Final Crisis, and why is it Superman Beyond?" Superman Beyond is the tie-in. It's
Interesting.
part of the collection. It's the two issues that you've been talking about, where Superman ends up first in limbo and then in the Monitor Sphere on the planet Mill in the Thought Robot.
Yeah, yeah. His consciousness that gets there only in the
Yes,
thought robot, so that he can
exactly.
fight Mandrak the vampire, invented so that it could fight the thought robot. As far
Yes,
as I can tell.
precisely. Yeah, yeah.
Yep, 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 yep.
Now, just you only have the context of what you've read in that book. Did you like that diversion? Like, is Superman Beyond at least like an interesting read, or were you kind of like, we were just doing Dark Side? Where's like,
It was the part I read the most and the
sure,
part I liked the least because I was like, what are we doing? Like I
right,
kept
right, right,
flipping back and being like, I'm missing what the context of why this matters. Because he even comes back and he's like, and I've saved my wife. I'm like, is that all we were doing? Is that all that happened or mattered? Was just him getting that drop of blood so I can be like, I kept it in my mouth for you, and then spat it in her mouth. I liked like, and this makes sense for my context. I liked the grizzled detective finding Darkseid's lair, like that kind of stuff, because that harkens
right.
back to why I like Batman. And then Superman going just the hardest Superman ever in those couple of series. I can see why Superman fans might like it, but I was
Sure.
completely lost.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I mean, I think part of the issue is yeah how it fits. You know,
Yeah.
like I know if you read this collection, it basically you read Final Crisis 1, 2, 3, I think, and then Superman Beyond 1 and 2,
Hmm.
and then Final Crisis Submit, and then Final Crisis 4 to 7.
Oh,
I
okay.
think is how that collection works.
Hmm.
If it's the same one that I've and you do that, and technically that's the right spot to put Superman Beyond in the
In the
story
timeline. Yeah.
because it has to happen while Lois is in the hospital and before space and time crunch, and we jump forward weeks ahead to where the Flash
Yes.
is.
Yeah.
It kind of has to be there, but it is a jarring read to be 3 chapters into a Dark Side story abandon it entirely.
Exactly.
The whole story with the monitors, who we've only seen barely because they exiled Nixuotan. You only see that a little bit. And then you're like in it for 2 issues. And at the end of that second issue, it feels like the event's
We're just
over.
yeah, we're just
Because
done.
Mandrak is gone, or he's mostly gone.
Right.
Superman saves Lois, and you go, great. And then you flip the page, and it's like, no shit, Black Lightning and the Tattooed Man, they're on the run. And you kind of
Yeah.
have to. It
It
is,
feels
I think,
so out of place.
it's a jarring read. I'll say I like Superman Beyond, but I could
Mhm.
totally appreciate, especially the way you were reading this.
Yeah, with zero context. And
Like,
I also
why
get
is
like if
this
you're a
here?
Superman fan, like it's like all the Superman for your buck. Like there's so much density of Supermans in here. It's every Superman. You got Nazi Superman, which is fun. That's a fun
Yeah,
thing. Uh
Overman. Yeah.
yep, yeah, Ultraman, even Captain Marvel got to come along for the ride, which was nice of them.
Mm-hmm. I do like. It happens later, not in that like side story, but where we get the Superman of the multiverse
Yeah.
and kind of look at all the different ones. Like that's if he wore orange. There's
Yeah,
just kind of
in a wacky universe.
yeah. I do kind of love that. You get to meet Calvin Ellis, President Superman,
Hmm.
later in the story,
That was fun. I did like that.
who's now kind of a fan favorite character. He's shown up a lot.
Was he
Um,
introduced in this?
or just before.
Oh,
But
neat.
yeah, it would
Okay.
have been if he was introduced before this, it would be in Countdown, like the series leading in.
Right. Yeah.
Um, I'll say a thing I like about Superman Beyond is that it really leans into. Have you ever read or watched All Star Superman?
Also, I
Very
haven't. It's next on my list with my Infinite subscription because I've heard a lot about it.
classic Morrison, more linear than this, but
Yeah.
that book embraces all of the kind of Silver Age like wackiness of Superman. And he's like feeding galaxies to like a pet sun eater or like that kind of weird shit. And the thing I like about Superman Beyond is that it does get to be that kind of thing where we're just talking about things like hope and hate in these kind of like very like tangible terms, these abstract
Right.
things. To your point, Captain Atom
Squishing
merges
them.
Ultraman and Superman together as what does he say? Like hate crime and selfless act, and he jams them
That was it.
together,
Yeah.
and the thought explosion of that propels them to the monitor sphere, which is kind of amazing. Like,
But when he's done in the when he's done with his thought robot, they just come back. Like, was there no fallout to them being combined? Because like every time they're on panels together, they're just like, we can't touch each other. We'd all both be kaput. And then is
yeah,
for like, there's no real lead in on how they overcome that explosion that it populates the thought robot.
no, well, no, you're right. There's not, and I also just kind of like that, like at the end of Superman Beyond, where they're like, only the monitors can bottle and hold lead.
Yeah.
And they go, "How did he do it?" And they go, "Like Superman can do it." Like that's just the answer. Like Superman can.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a cop out, but I don't know. I kind of love that. I think if you like Superman, I think that's the shit you like. It's just
Well,
like
I liked
Superman
that too
just
because
can do it. That's the answer. Like
yeah, yeah. Because like, he's strong enough to like hold in his mouth or whatever, and then he passes it to her through a kiss. I thought that was very cute.
yeah,
What I also liked about the Superman timeline is their little time traveling Beatles yellow submarine. Like that's a very fun vehicle.
yeah. The Ultima Thule, and it travels by Captain Marvel playing this giant harp
You're
because
right.
all of the universes are different vibrational frequencies.
Oh, is that how it works?
So they have to play it like an instrument to travel
Mhm.
the multiverse, which I think is very very fun.
Why was that Captain Marvel's job?
Great question.
Of all the Superman, guys, I
I
got this.
I understand that they're being relatively quote serious about it, but it would have been great to just have like a Superman with like a powdered Mozart wig doing it. We needed like
Yeah,
composer Superman to do
yeah. Child savant Superman.
it. His Lex Luthor is Salieri. Um,
See, that's a timeline. That's a story I would read.
you're right.
Get
Yeah.
on that.
Okay. Next question. This comes from Chris Brooks, who asks, What percentage of this event do you think you understand and follow? And how many readings did it take you to get there? I've read it 3 times, and I think I follow about 50 to 60% of it.
Oh, not bad.
I'll say I've read this probably almost 15 times, and I say I understand about, I'll stretch and say 90%.
Nice, fair. And with
Yeah,
that, even flipping, because I've got it in my lap, even flipping through it now, things are starting to click. I'm like, oh, I see how that, like, I get how I could appreciate it better on another read through. But I'm
sure.
definitely like finishing this without reading any supplementary comments. I was maybe 10%. I was like,
Sure.
Dark Side came back. I understood the time traveling bullet part. I thought that was that was just within my
Yeah,
flights and tights tolerance. I thought that was a cool thing that they did with it.
totally.
But most things, and I knew like Flash time travel that goes hand in hand. Didn't really get the skiing guy. That's something I had no previous reference to.
So
But
after
apparently, he's a
you,
Flash villain.
well, the Black Flash is a speedster incarnation of death, but the Black
Ah,
Racer, the guy on skis, is the new god incarnation of death. So
okay,
it's the one that reaps new gods, basically.
gotcha.
Um, After reading, you said that you went and you read some comments and you read some other stuff. What were some of the pieces that helped? Like, what were some of the things you read later where you were like, oh, okay,
It was like I think I read a bit on the Superman saga chapter that well, like that was mostly what I was looking for because the rest of it I
right,
was like I can roughly get the I'm missing a lot of chunks, but I can roughly get like time traveling bullet, like there's a
sure,
blip to the future, Flash gets all wibbly wobbly, timey wimey all the time.
sure,
Uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and I did before I read this, I did read the side story of them trying to clone Batman. So every once in a while it
right,
showed him in the tank, and I knew what was going on there.
right,
So I got bits and pieces, but most of it was, yeah, like trying to figure out who the monitors were and what they represented in the story and how, and that was where I went down the kind of meta rabbit hole. Like, yeah, it's a commentary on making comic books as a whole. And that's where
right,
I was like, okay, like this isn't bad. It just wasn't for me at the time. I just didn't have the context to understand it well enough,
right.
which I'm not sure if that makes it bad or good.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, fair enough. Um, yeah, I mean, I'd say I probably didn't really I didn't crack maybe like the 70, 75% mark until I read it like 8 times and
Yeah.
kind of gone to Reddit to like see
Yeah,
what
to
people
fill in
thought
a
or
little bit more.
what the pieces were. Because there's a lot, and I also think there's like it's so narratively bizarre. Like the
Yeah.
beats of it don't work the way most stories do. That I think it just you kind of just have to go in. I think the most helpful thing you could do is just go in for vibes
Yeah.
and read it for vibes,
Yeah.
and then fill in details
And the
later.
art is astounding. Like it's one of the
Yeah,
most beautiful books in my collection. It's very, very, very good. And those are the two things I knew about it. It's like Batman dies and the art is astounding. And that was the main selling points of it. And then I
yeah.
tried to
There's
read it and it was completely opaque to me.
yeah,
Like, these
I
lines are
mean
pretty.
that sounds about right. Yeah. All right, we're gonna I'm gonna jump ahead here over to Instagram. So this is from Keegan Steedman, who asks, "What are your thoughts on Darkseid's reincarnation? I think it's interesting that he's a sort of omniversal villain, but at the same time, I feel like it works better when he's just one being that's really hard to kill. It feels like defeating Darkseid now feels meaningless, given we know he will just come back down the line." Now, this is a comic book thing all over, but what's your
Right.
perspective on the stakes of something like Darkseid? Because this book starts with Darkseid having died.
Yeah. And that's like that's with any comic book event on any scale, even my favorite ones. Like you have to check a lot of stuff for the door when you read comic books. You got to like be ready for that flights and tights nonsense part of it, and part of
Right.
that is checking the stakes at the door. Because in the
Totally.
end, none of these matter. The canon's going to reset with something at some point. So you just have to be like, wow, the world's really going to end this time. And like let yourself be like get lost in that part of the narrative.
Right.
Otherwise, you're never going to have any fun. So I'm
Right.
a little I guess I'm neutral on Darkseid being able the like being able to die and it minimizing it, because that's kind of what I expect with almost any comic book fight. Because
Yeah,
eventually they'll
I,
either come back or they'll slip away, or we'll never find out who'll win in a race between Flash and Superman. We always find ways to wiggle out of those answers.
totally. And I think I agree in general. And I mean, I think this also, I can't remember what it was, some other Marvel thing or Star Wars thing or something. And people were like, online were getting all uppity about it because it was a prequel and they were like, oh, it was Andor. Before it came
Mhm.
out, people were like, who cares? We know how he dies. And I was like,
Yeah.
that's not the only kind of stakes there are.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
like stakes doesn't equal how you ultimately end.
Yeah.
Stakes
No.
is like any given moment, like, do you succeed in your mission? What's the fallout? Do you compromise your
Exactly.
moral integrity? So like there's all sorts of different pieces to that.
And
And
the
I think,
character relationships. Like there was nobody was
yeah.
surprised by the twist at the end of Titanic, but we all still liked the movie.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God, what happens? I thought they were gonna get out. Why didn't you turn the wheel in time? This movie sucks.
A very good point. Um, but yeah, so I mean, for me, I think that helped crystallize that. Like, I don't really care if
Yeah.
they die and come back. What I care about is when they die. What does that do to the characters around them? Because
Yeah.
even in this book, early in the book, the secret society assassinates Martian Manhunter,
Hmm.
and they have a funeral for him on Mars. And
Yeah.
at the funeral, part of Superman's eulogy is, "We'll miss him and pray for a resurrection." Like they also know how
Yeah.
many of them have
This is
come
how this
back,
works.
but they don't know that it is a guarantee. Like
Yeah.
there's still some. I like the way they handle that because there's some emotional fallout to that.
Yeah.
After decades of people dying or losing their powers and coming back. Um, I think there's something super creepy about the new gods dying and then their souls inhabiting like mortal forms. And I love
Yeah.
the
That's
idea
sinister.
that they're like burning through the flesh of these host bodies because they're like
Yeah.
too celestial for them.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's really, that. Yeah, I really like that aspect of it too. And like some of my favorite parts were that was like the detective finding Darkseid's lair and getting past to it, and like him struggling against it till they put the big steel mask on him and stuff. And the thumbs up, thumbs down moment was one of my favorite parts of the book.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah,
like
I
hearing
mean
the
it's
internal monologue.
and it's such like a sad monologue because like
Yeah,
Dan Turpin, very hard as nails detective, but
yeah.
not
It's still just a dude.
superhuman. He's
Yeah,
not Superman. It's not he can't just do it because he's the protagonist or whatever.
yeah, yeah,
And it's that idea of like him just knowing that he's losing and losing control is like actually like very very well done. I love
yeah.
that bit. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, and same on the same note of like any individual comic run I read, I ignore the consequences after or before it for the most part. Like there is some
Sure.
world building stuff that happens, but to be lost in, to enjoy the stakes more, I like forget that like yeah, like this he'll come back sometime or be regenerated. Like I before I read this, I actually read the Batman RIP storyline,
Oh, okay, yeah.
which has the like the funeral for Batman, which is like happening in his head as he's dying, and I absolutely loved that book. That was super, super, super well done, and it had a bunch of like callbacks, like the art style of Batman in the coffin kept changing around like what his more significant storyline. Like for a
Right.
moment, he's Long Halloween Batman. For another, he's Dark Knight Batman. Like it was a really neat trade off of that, and I couldn't have enjoyed that if I was just like, well, like it'll reset. He's fine.
Right. Yeah, yeah, totally. That's true. All right. Next question here. Okay, we've talked about this a little bit, but I think we should dig in a bit on it. So this question comes from that Guy the Geek who asks, I read Final Crisis right after Infinite Crisis, and it was a mess. Where the hell did these monitors come from? Especially the weird vampire one. That plot line really came out of nowhere.
Thank God for I don't feel alone now because I put this
No,
book down and I'm just like I'm wrong and I'm dumb. I have to be. This book is so freaking famous in DC Comics that I'm just wrong and I'm dumb and I'm just now. Anyone asks me about it, I'm like it was my favorite of all time. Like, but it's
yeah,
refreshing. refreshing to hear all these questions be like asking, just like, did you get it? Or like, I didn't get it because holy fuck, did I ever not get it?
Well, I mean, here, I mean, before we dig into the question itself, here's the other thing: is like Morrison has written some other event kind of things or high concept sort of things before. Their Animal Man run is
Mhm.
very like fourth wall breaky. Their Doom Patrol run is kind of wild. After this, they wrote one called The Multiversity, which is even more metafictional than this. That one actually features a, a comic book that is meant to be a real life superhero on our world, in the real world. The comic book is a superhero.
Yeah.
It's even more like that. But those all kind of happen off to the side. If
Mhm.
you were reading comics, there was Crisis, Infinite Crisis. This is Final Crisis, the mainline big continuity event.
Yeah.
To go in and read something that kind of esoteric, I don't think anyone was ready for it. You know, I
Right.
think a lot of people have warmed to it. There's a lot of people that really like it, but I think it's not crazy to go in and have a reaction like, "What the fuck is this?" like I think that's totally reasonable.
Yeah, exactly. Like it went super artsy fartsy when I was looking for, flights and tights. That was what I was looking for, a fun little caped adventure with higher stakes and more crossovers than normal. And then I got a artistic commentary on the industry.
So let's talk a little bit about the monitors and about Mandrake and about the idea of the monitors. That there's this whole thing, even the monitors that aren't necessarily vampires,
I thought they
there's
all
this,
were. Wasn't that the thing?
well, all of them except for, I guess, Nixuoten.
Right.
Um, but there's this idea that they used to be just kind of faceless, nameless, timeless, just something that existed. They've become implicated in story. This thing at the
Hmm.
center of the multiverse, these stories that are the worlds of the multiverse have infected them. They've given them like time and beginnings and endings and all these uh, kind of constructs. From what you were reading, what's your kind of take on that story with the monitors? The idea that they're kind of like editorial or the executive, in the metafiction sense.
Yeah. Weirdly, I remember kind of getting that part because there's a time at the end where
Right.
like two of them are chatting with each other and being decided like, oh, I guess it's over for us because everything was collapsing and they were going to go back to being like a formless power. And that part I actually kind of understood a lot more than the vampiric stuff because like
Okay.
I was like, oh, okay, they're meant to be like a faceless infinite that was anthropomorphized after being like contaminated with the idea of humans, I guess, is kind of how
Right.
I interpreted it. Was like this overwhelming power we can't understand that like collapsed into this form because it saw what we were. And that's also why they made the thought robot, I think, because they briefly saw Superman and were like, this is cool, we should build one. And
Yeah,
but
yeah,
and then for them to have that tender moment of being, it's like, it's been nice knowing you, and then being like, yeah, this was cool, right? And then it all fades to white, and I was like,
yeah.
okay, like I did like that one. I didn't understand what they were, but that brief little moment had some emotional weight. I didn't get that like they're defenders of the multiverse or something, or like they're bureaucrats.
So the monitors as a race, as a plurality, they only show up for the first time in Countdown. So if you're asking where they come from, Countdown series that leads to Final Crisis introduces the monitors, more or less. And you meet some of them. They're each assigned one of the 52 parallels to
Mhm.
manage, basically. This is different from the original monitor where there's just one for infinite Earths. He was just there. He's like, I'm monitoring. That's what I do. And now there was like one kind of assigned. They also had more personality, like these ones. They had become kind of characters in the story. So that
Right.
whole idea of the being sort of like infected by story kind of tracks.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think ultimately the I think the overarching point is that if you're sustaining yourself on the creative ideas of others, you're ultimately damaging the creativity of the thing.
Hmm.
That's the vampire beat
Subtle.
in a real, like, vague nutshell, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so what they have to do is like, in Morrison's ideal world, is like executives relinquish it all, just go
Yep.
back to being like the faceless overvoid, and
Yeah. Let me draw on my white page.
let the stories guide themselves. Don't tell me what I have to do with Batman. Let me
Yeah.
just do what I'm doing. Um, but yeah, I mean that's roughly the monitors. But again, it's funny that arc has almost no literal connection to the story with Darkseid. There's kind of
No.
two parallel crises happening. There's the one which is Darkseid falling and releasing the anti-life equation and becoming like a supermassive idea as
Mhm.
Darkseid becomes like the only being that is. He becomes supermassive and crunches space time with him.
Oh yeah, because he's like collapsing into black hole or something. Yeah, I didn't
Yeah,
get what that was about.
and I think they briefly say that Mandrak and the vampire monitors are sort of capitalizing on that.
Right.
But really, the stories aren't connected at all.
Yeah, which is why the Superman bit that goes into that is such a hard about turn because it's really hard to figure out why that matters.
Yeah, totally, totally. All right, just got a couple more questions here. Let's see what we got here. We've talked about a few, but I think there's some more here. This Tone DX 2049 asks, "What is your favorite moment in Final Crisis?" And a moment you think could have been improved. You mentioned a couple already, but I wonder
Yeah,
what your actual favorite is.
my favorite. That would yeah, like I think I mentioned already. Probably the thumbs up, thumb down, and like the internal monologue of the detective trying to fight off Darkseid's influence. I thought that was
Yeah,
very cool. Yeah, I think I'll go with that one because that's one that stands out in my mind without flipping through it again.
that's a really good one. I love like there's because he's been slowly kind of basically in Darkseid's been slowly taking him over, inhabiting him and corrupting him, possessing him. But there's a shot early in his descent where there's like a cracked mirror, and the cracks of the mirror look like the kind of stony sort of look
Oh,
that
neat.
Darkseid has.
Yeah,
And I think it's such a good kind of visual of what's happening to Turpin. I like
yeah, yeah.
that. I think oh man, it's tricky. I really like, it's maybe a little basic, but I like Batman's gun monologue thing.
That was
It's
cool.
maybe a little edge lordy, but just the idea that like Batman, you know, coming out, he does the Batman thing of like, I figured it all out, what the bullet was, how you killed Orion, all this kind of
Yeah,
stuff. I said I would never use a gun, but it's the end of the world. So, like I think that moment, staring down Darkseid, and Darkseid says something like, "Can you outrace the Omega beams or whatever?" And he just goes for it. And I think that's a cool Batman.
yeah. That was, and that's no, that was probably the other moment that stuck out for me too. Because I was fine. First off, it was the character I've been waiting for like 100 goddamn pages, so it was
Sure,
nice to hear
yeah,
him say something.
totally,
And yeah,
totally,
for it, like it carries that weight because they're like, oh shit, he's actually going to use a gun this time,
yeah,
and it's a very brief Batman, but it's very condensed. Like I solved the mystery and also appreciate the threat so much that I'll do this one thing that I never ever do, and he actually never really does that. I'm aware of. There's very, very few moments in Batman canon where that happens, where the threat is severe enough or he has no choice to actually use a gun like that. So I think that carried a
yeah,
lot of weight.
yeah, totally. Trying to think, what's another moment I like? I mean, it's some of the weirder Morrison stuff, but I kind of like the the idea of the what do they call it? The God number, the Rubik's cube, and
Oh yeah,
how many
yeah,
moves it takes to beat it. And I think it's Metron, but in a mortal form, cracks it in like one less than what you're supposed to be able to do, and
right.
that like kind of opens the gateway for Nixuotan to remember his word for all of those uh,
Yeah, that was
things
definitely
to
neat
happen.
too. And as
I kind of like
as
that.
as a bit as like a sciencey nerd, I knew about that like God number and everything. So that definitely resonated with me for sure. I didn't know what was going on, but that I got the monologue behind it.
Oh yeah, and if you asked me like literally what happens in that moment, I couldn't tell you. Like,
Yeah.
what about solving it unleashes a power? Like, The
Apparently,
literal.
it was a mother box or something. Like that's the what I read online was it because it
I mean,
pings and mother boxes apparently ping.
yes, they do. Well, that tracks too. But again, this is what I mean when I say I think it's best to read it for vibes. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah. Fair.
fill in the details as you go, but it's like I know I like that moment. I
Right.
know I
Yeah.
think it's like it's a turning point. It feels like a turning point whether you get it or not. And you're like
Yeah.
something's happening now, and
Totally. Yeah.
I
And
kind
I
of
definitely
respond
had
to
that
that.
feeling despite not knowing. And same with the Batman with the gun and the thumbs up, thumb down. Like there's really good isolated moments that if you just let yourself be taken by the ride can be very fun.
Totally. And I mean, talking around the Batman thing, Batman shoots Darkseid and sort of mortally wounds him. But
Hmm.
Darkseid's not dead. But I do like that the Flash's outrace death and the Black Racer ends up
Yeah.
getting
Finishes him.
Darkseid. And I think that's cool. There's a lot of good kind of Flash talk in this. Jay has a moment with like the Flash family where he says like, "I know Wally outraced death one time," or like just
Yeah.
all this kind of stuff about how fast death can move, how fast the Flashes are, and I like that kind of stuff. I'm a big
Yeah.
nerd for that.
Yeah.
All right, let's see here. Da-da-da-da. Oh, here's a good one from JK, who asks, "One of the initial villains of this book is Libra, who I understand was a discarded D-list villain before he suddenly became a herald of Darkseid. What was Libra's deal before this story? How did he become Darkseid's errand boy? Also, was Darkseid's plans connected to Mandrax?" We'll answer that last one. Nope.
No.
Um,
Yeah. No.
what
I
did
am interested in the answer to this because I have
what
no
did
idea.
you think of Libra generally in this story? Because Libra kind of starts strong, and then you kind of forget about him, and then
Yeah, and
gets sort
I
of
think
unceremoniously dispatched by Luthor.
I think it was kind of the perfect combo because I never took him seriously, which I think
Right.
is perfect because he was a little bit sinister, but also you never really took him seriously as the big bad, which was exactly where he was supposed to be. So I
Yeah.
think he was well written in that way because it was always just like, oh, this guy's up to some bad nonsense. So you knew he was serious, but you also never I never would have been like this is the main villain which suited his role. I don't know if it was the costume or just his like way about him. He had real minion vibes
Yeah.
or
I
like
mean,
henchman vibes.
if I remember, Libra had shown up and fought the Justice League like way long time ago. And I can't even remember necessarily. He might have like learned their secrets or something like that. But it
Yeah.
was too much for him, and he like phased out of existence, or he disappeared, or he like entered some other reality, and then was sort of forgotten about, and got kind of scooped up from there by Morrison. And I think Morrison even described Libra as his sort of like perversion of like John the Baptist. He's like here to
Oh
like
yeah, yeah.
spread the gospel of Darkseid to kind of get all of the villains on side to get to organize the justifiers, the technology that broadcasts the anti-life equation directly into people's heads. That's Mad
Hmm.
Hatter technology.
Yeah, I liked that.
um, they he basically takes over the secret society. um, I like him, and I like the threat of him. Killing Martian Manhunter establishes a certain level of threat, but I also
It
love the
does.
disdain from like Luthor and Savannah
Totally. Yeah.
and these other villains that are like, "Who the fuck are you?" Like,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, who's this goofy figure?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I enjoyed that. I think it's fitting that Libra ultimately doesn't amount to anything because
Yeah.
that's sort of like cult acolyte kind of deal anyway. Like if you're thinking about like Lovecraft or like other things, it's like it's not about the people worshiping the
Yeah.
thing.
There's no
It's about
reward.
the terrifying elder god that really doesn't care if you believe in it or not.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
Yeah. There's
I
no
think
seat at the table.
yeah, exactly. So I kind of I like Libra for that.
Hmm.
Um, is there speaking of the supervillains, because we don't necessarily get a ton of them, there any kind of things that stood out or moments that you liked that featured kind of like the terrestrial supervillains?
The terrestrial, yeah, I have Luther, like you already mentioned, Libra and Luther's interactions, I think, steal the show. because like Libra's plans are all going exactly as planned, but there's still Luther standing aside, being like, "Yeah, fuck this guy," like,
Yeah.
and still scheming on his own. So that's like of the terrestrial villains, definitely Luther.
Well, and I like how, Superman comes back from the future and he's looked at and memorized the schematics of the miracle machine.
Hmm.
And he has to get everyone to help build it, but he only gives like little pieces of it to the villains.
Yeah,
And even the little pieces he's given feels like too much. Like Luthor and Savannah are like, we know what this is.
yeah,
We just don't know how to build the whole thing yet. But I kind of love that idea too. It's a kind of it's such a big thing. I love when like villains and heroes have to team up to take a thing
yeah.
down. Like I'm kind of a sucker for that shit. Um, so I'm into that, and I
Yeah.
like that Luthor is salty about it. He has some line like, "We won't tell anyone that this happened," and I'm going to take all the credit when we win. Superman's like, "Fine, Lex,
Yeah.
whatever." Like,
Not my. I've already got so much credit.
yeah, I kind of enjoy that. All right, last question here from not I Noob Master 69.
Nice. I think that kid's headshotted me online before.
Yeah, yeah, nice. Um, of the tie-in series, which issues would you steer away
Oh, repeat that one. The audio got
from?
blemished a
So,
bit.
of the tie-in series, what do you recommend, and which issues would you steer away from? So, you've already read Superman Beyond,
Mhm.
and you've read Final Crisis Submit, which is Black Lightning tattooed man,
Oh, okay.
which is in the middle of that collection as well.
Yeah.
So, those are two tie-ins um, to the story. Although I kind of I get why you kind of they break some of these things out, but also it's like just make Final Crisis like 11 issues instead of 7, and just work these in.
Yeah.
I kind of
I
sometimes I feel that way depending on the event.
I thought that's what it was. I didn't even realize they were separate events that tied in. I thought it was all like in series.
Well, and here's the craziest bit: that's not all of Final Crisis, let alone the fact that there are tie-in individual issues from different series that were happening. There's also other tie-in series. So there's one that I find interesting called Final Crisis Revelations,
Hmm.
and this is one in which Vandal Savage, who we see at the beginning of this story, and then he kind of wanders off. He gets his hands on the Spear of Destiny and takes control of the Spectre, who's basically the spirit of God's vengeance manifested as a superhero.
Hmm.
Um, And it's a whole like religious story. It involves the Question, Renee Montoya. It involves Batwoman. It involves obviously the Spectre, Vandal Savage. There's you get the spirit of God's mercy, I think, in that story. And you briefly see, I think, Mercy and the Spectre in one panel near the end of Final Crisis 1.
Oh, okay.
Stuff going clearly. But that's a cool story. I've been increasingly into like the magic side of things, magic and the sort of religion kind of angles on in DC. That's a
Hmm.
cool story. Um, if you like your if you like your street level villains, there's one called Final Crisis Rogues. Is it Rogues Rebellion or Rogues Revenge or something like that?
Hmm.
I'm mixing it up with a different Rogues tie into a different event. But it's the Flash Rogues, like Captain Cold, Heatwave, Mirror Master,
Oh, cool.
that
Yeah.
that group, who are they're always just like, we just want to rob banks. Enough with the fucking crises. They're always like, I'm out. I hate this.
Yeah.
Um,
We want to be friendly neighborhood villains.
kind of, yeah, yeah. Like every time the skies turn red, they go like, God damn it. So,
More sky beams. This will put it
yeah,
off.
yeah. So I mean, I think if you like the rogues, that one's fun. I think maybe what this collection is missing is the Legion of Three Worlds.
Okay.
It's that's where Superman goes to the future. He ends up fighting Superboy Prime, but there is this kind of other meta thread about Superboy Prime, about story, about how fans interact with story as opposed to executives.
Oh,
And it
interesting.
does kind of feel like that belongs in this. Like the
Yeah,
collection should be Final Crisis, Superman Beyond, Submit, and Lead to the Three Worlds. They should all be in there. That's the one that
gotcha.
feels like yet you get the most to gain from it to add to
Yeah,
this story.
especially with like you're saying, if the Superboy Prime represents the like the shitty fans, and then we have the monitors which represent the shitty executives. It sounds like it would tie in well.
Totally, and I think it adds some like color to the story, and
Hmm.
then also when you get to Final Crisis Five or whatever, you're not like, why the fuck is
Yeah,
Superman here? Like
yeah,
that's not
yeah.
where he
That wasn't
was.
about turn. Unlike with like the Mandrake storyline, though, that one I assumed there was a tie-in. I'm like, okay, there's a tie into this that I missed. Whereas with the Mandrake one, I'm like, this I don't care how you could tie into this.
Yeah,
This is
sure.
insane.
Well, I mean, I know that the way that you jumped into this was sort of chaotic,
Yeah.
but is there a part of you, are you ready to be heard again? Are you ready to try a tie-in series, or do you think you're kind of like I'm Final Crisis dad?
I'd probably do some of the tie-in series. Yeah, like this was a hard reset back into comic books, especially because
Yeah,
like because I was reading Grant Morrison leading into this. I was reading like Batman and Son and stuff. Like I was reading really normal comparative stories, and then this was a hard about face. But yeah, like it had fun moments, so I definitely check out more of it. And the spinoff like Batman R.I.P. was really good. I like the funeral one especially. So it had value for sure.
I think there's some interesting stuff that falls out of this.
Hmm.
Weirdly, I would argue that Final Crisis, of all of the crises, has some of the smallest overall continuity impact,
Right. That makes sense.
more or less. I mean, some stuff comes out of it, but a lot less than you would think. Um, the death of Batman, quote, heavy quotes,
Yeah.
leads to Battle for the Cowl, which is interesting in its own way, with
Hmm.
all of the kind of the Robins essentially go to war
Yeah. All the
over
bad
who's
kids.
going to be Batman, mostly because Jason Todd is decides he's going to be Batman.
Yeah.
Um, Martian Manhunter stays dead for another year and a half until a big event called Blackest Night,
Hmm.
which is DC's big zombie story where the dead rise, the Black
Oh,
Lantern
that's cool.
Corps.
Year and a half is a solid time to keep a big hero like that, Dad.
Totally. I mean, like it's unrealistic to think we're ever going to get a 20-year stretch again like we
No.
did with the Flash, or even like a 10-year stretch like we did with Hal Jordan. Because even when
Hmm.
Hal was dead, he became the Spectre for a bit. Like he wasn't gone. Like they kept him around. Um, I think that stuff's kind of interesting. Um, yeah, I mean, ultimately, weirdly, Final Crisis is it's pretty contained for something
Hmm.
that big. You would think it would be like, and then all the books have to reset. You got to do this
Yeah.
big thing, but none of that really happens. After Infinite Crisis, they had this series called 52, and then they had this countdown series that was leading to Final Crisis, and both of those are like, holy shit, the multiverse is back, and it
Yeah.
was like, this is what we're exploring now. Like, oh my god, look at all these Earths, look at all what's happening to time, all this kind of shit that they were exploring. After Final Crisis, they kind of go like, can we just I need to take a breather. It's like a real kind of like, oh.
Yeah.
But I mean, the biggest thing is that you explore the return of Barry Allen, get Flash Rebirth,
Okay.
and that's the story that retcons Barry's origin to be what we understand it as now, which
Hmm.
is that the Reverse Flash went back in time and killed his mom.
Right. Gotcha.
Until 2009, that wasn't true. Barry's parents were like they were happy and fine,
Hmm.
and he had a fine childhood, and he was like the most boring origin for a hero ever. He's just
Yeah.
like, I grew up fine and I was smart and there were no obstacles. So then I
Yeah.
got
And
hit
now
by
I run
lightning
fast.
and now I run fast. And it wasn't until he came back in Final Crisis and then he got that Rebirth series that they were like,
Oh,
nope,
interesting. Yeah.
tragedy time.
Yeah. And now and without that, we wouldn't have that hilarious reverse Flash meme, which is
Yeah, I mean,
it was me, Barry.
that's one of my all-time favorite things in the world in that book is the pettiness of Reverse Flash. That it's not just that he killed his mom. He's like, I also made you suck at t-ball, and I tripped you one time at school.
Yeah.
Like,
I made you
because
pee your
also
pants.
you picture him. He's he's like a 30-year-old man fucking with like a 9-year-old. He's got all the cosmic powers of the Speed Force,
Yeah.
and he's just
This is what
pranking
he's
a
doing with it.
9-year-old. Yeah, it's kind of amazing.
I forget which
Yeah.
series it's in, but there's a it's got to be somewhere in my collection, but it's Batman talking about his disdain for the Green Lantern, because he's just like this.
Oh
This
yeah.
man has all of the power of his imagination. He could summon a tidal wave to wipe out only all crime, and he summons like a slightly large hammer. Like this guy's an
Yeah.
idiot. I wish I had the ring.
Yeah, I mean, Batman has an interesting history of sort of animosity with the Green Lanterns, and one can't help but think that he's like, I've got lots of willpower.
Yeah, exactly. Like, give it to
What's
me. This guy
what's
sucks.
what's a bro got to do to get chosen by the court? Um, yeah, I mean, probably the Flash's origin is maybe one of the biggest things that technically comes out of Final Crisis, but it's not in
Right.
Final Crisis. That doesn't happen in that book,
Yeah,
so
and you
it's
don't
kind
need
of
to read Final Crisis to get it either, I assume.
it's kind of a stretch, but yeah, sort of interesting. Do you have any, as we sort of finish up here? Do you have any thoughts on Final Crisis or like words of hate you'd like to throw at anyone that convinced you to read it?
uh, yeah, just like mostly just I felt misled, I think, is the biggest thing with Final Crisis.
Sure.
Because it was buttered up to be this like, and also like you see glimpses of the art and it looks phenomenal. It looks like something
Yeah.
you really want to read. And like this big lead up of like, this is going to reset everything. Batman's dead. You should check it out. And for me to dive into like this insane meta commentary from this salty fucking comic artist that hates all of his bosses and decides to take it out on us instead of just having a fun little adventure where we fight Darkseid for a while. It's like you fight Darkseid and Darkseid's depression, and there's a bunch of people that monitor the universe and keep stealing my fucking ideas. And I have like, and it just goes on and on. I'm just sitting here just like this is none of these are my problems. Can't you just write a fun story? That's what I was here for. Grant Morrison's like, no, you're going to sit down, you're going to listen. I hate everything about this industry.
That's really funny. I mean, it's funny too because I know totally where you're coming from, but Morrison, though outspoken, is still like weirdly in love with comics. Like you talk to someone like Alan Moore, and he's like,
Yes.
"Get fucked," you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
I was just about to mention
And
Alan Moore.
Morrison is not like that. But
No.
you read the work and you go like I have notes.
Yeah.
Morrison's like,
He peppers it in. Alan Moore
yeah,
just burns it to the ground. He hates everything and everyone about everything.
yeah, and you know, somewhat justified, but
True.
he's taken a very hardline stance, and Morrison's like, I still like comics. I
Yeah,
just wish
exactly.
people would fuck off.
And also, like Alan Moore, but like as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, he has much more reasons to be salty, right? Because like Watchmen
Oh
is the
yeah,
most famous comic of all time, and it was kind of stolen out from under him, as I understand it.
yeah. I think he had understood or something had been maybe promised or whatever about like the creative ownership of it, but
Yeah.
ultimately it just ended up being work for hire DC work.
Oh, yeah.
Seems shifty and bad, but
Yeah.
um, yeah. I mean, here's the thing I'll say that we didn't get to, but a thing that I like about Final Crisis is Morrison obviously loves the weird shit, and some of the stuff that's in this book, some of the stuff that gets referenced, like Command D, that bunker. That's a reference to another Kirby book called Command D, the Last Boy on Earth, that was meant to be a sort of Planet of the Apes book. That's a book
Oh,
where
okay.
there's tiger people and monkey people and dog people,
Oh, interesting.
and
Yeah.
he's the last boy. And Morrison uses the crunched timeline and the bombed out Bloodhaven and this Command D bunker to introduce Command D as part of like the main kind of timeline of DC. We meet some of like the tiger people that were made by Makari and Sam Simeon or Dr. Simeon.
Right. Yeah.
Um, I think that is an interesting way to do that. We see the Atomic Knights on their Dalmatian, like giant
Yeah.
Dalmatians. That's a crazy old Silver Agey thing, and to have the Atomic Knights in there is really cool.
Yeah.
Um, I like the idea. I don't know that I love the execution, but I love the idea of super young team of uh,
Right.
the young like Japanese superheroes that are more about fame than actual
Yeah,
superheroing.
I liked that too. It was kind of like a cynical look at heroes, kind of almost Watchmen-y.
And a weirdly predictive of like
Absolutely.
influencer culture and things like
Yeah,
that.
it like predating Instagram and everything. Yeah.
And it's an idea that Morrison explores further in the Multiversity. There's a book called Multiversity the Just. It takes place on Earth 16. It's a world where the first generation of heroes stops the crime, so
Hmm.
that their kids, the next generation, have nothing to fight for, and they become these kind of vapid celebrities, basically.
Yeah.
Um, I kind of like those ideas. I think there's enough weird crap in there from different corners of DC that I'm into, and I appreciate that they get tied together. I don't know if I think I don't know if I think that Morrison that they land the plane.
Right.
I
Yeah.
appreciate like the effort.
Yeah, it was a very cool looking plane.
Yeah, very cool looking plane. Yeah, yeah. With no landing gear.
No landing gear.
Um,
No, didn't need to tie that in.
yeah, that's awesome. I love I I don't think I fully understood that that's how you meant this. I kind of uh I think that might be my new favorite way to introduce someone to Final Crisis. Because truly, I think I thought I was like, well, Gavin probably like he's probably read like Infinite Crisis or something. Like he's probably read something, and then
Yeah.
Final Crisis is just a bit weird. Like this is the best that this could have gone.
Yeah.
It's my favorite possible
Yeah, I
version
went
of
from
it.
street thugs in Gotham to this insane journey. There's a lot to hold. And I'm glad Batman was unconscious for most of it because I feel like even he'd be like, guys, this is too much. We need to settle down.
Yeah, I mean, not to keep being meta over it, but it is funny too, though, how much time this book spends with street level heroes. They
Hmm.
seem to be the ones that make it the furthest.
Yeah.
Superman's occupied. Wonder Woman falls to the Mordecai virus and becomes one of
Right.
the Furies. But we follow Black Lightning, Green Arrow, Black Canary. Like we're
Yeah, that's
following
true.
like pretty street
Standard.
level kind of heroes, which is sort of interesting to me. But,
Yeah.
um, Gavin, thank you so much for making time to talk about Final Crisis. This has
Yeah,
been
of course.
real fun for me. Do you have stuff you want to plug or social media where people can find you if they want
Yeah,
to
of course.
recommend something else insane for you to read?
Yeah, if you want to shoot me your insane comic books that you love and that I'm not at all ready for, just shoot me a message on Instagram. You can find me at Gavin Clarkson Comedy, and that's where I post about shows and other wacky stuff. So if you want to find me or just hate anything I said about Final Crisis and want to fight me about it, we can meet in the parking lot after school and just message me which school on Instagram.
This is as good a time as any, I think, to
Oh, your mic bugged out again for that sentence. Let's take it again.
Am I back?
There you go. You're good.
Okay. It's as good a time as any to dust off a plug for go to Apple Music, find Stand Up North, Shredded and Dead. Both Gavin and I are comedians on that album. Get it, download all of our tracks, stream all of our tracks repeatedly.
Yep.
Uh, we could use the like 0.01 cents a play.
Yep. Exactly. But
Um, yeah, check that out. And yeah, you'll be able to send questions for next week's episode when I decide what that episode's going to be about, and you'll see the post go up. And you can send those to Dr. DC Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, at Dr. DC on Twitter and TikTok, our subreddit r/Dr_DC. Visit our website, drdcpodcast.com or .ca. You can send an email, drdcpodcast@gmail.com. And check out our Patreon, patreon.com/DrDC. There's a $1, $5, $7 level. They all give you access to the Discord, our awesome Discord community. And at the higher levels, you get bonus episodes and theme polls. And at the highest level, you get bonus episodes of Toretto Talks going through every installment of the Fast franchise in anticipation of Fast X in May. So if you want to hear me talk a lot about cars I know nothing about, that's the spot. Yeah, and check out Ghost Facers, the other podcast Richard and I do, where we're going through every single episode of the CW Supernatural. We finished season 6. We're about to start season 7 of 15. So strap in. It's going to be a long road ahead. Gavin, thank you again so much for this.
Oh, you're very welcome.
And we'll talk to you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Ciao, ciao. Adios.
All the superheroes, they always fight for what is right. Live with danger and adventure, they are men of might.
This was a Brain Freeze podcast.